Alright, super important topic today. It's all about dopamine. This is a very important chemical when it comes to making the right things addictive, preventing depressive ruts, and just having more fun, motivation in general. In this video, we're going to be talking about why it matters, what dopamine is specifically, the dopamine cycle, which is very important to understand if you want to improve how you work with dopamine, and effective practices that we can integrate into our day-to-day life. So why are we talking about this? Why does it matter? Why would we want to improve how we work with dopamine? Well, if you want drive, as it's called, if you want motivation, if you want to be able to persist through difficult things over a long time span, you're going to need to be working with dopamine in an effective way and not burning yourself out. If you want a sense of success, like a sense of reward for having done a behavior that is desirable, then dopamine is the chemical signaler for that. And so we want to be receptive to dopamine. We want to make sure that that is rewarding the right behaviors, not the destructive ones. If you want daily energy, focus, and flow even, then dopamine is very, very important for that. It gets you excited to get up and work on something, especially a big, meaningful, difficult goal. You want every little scrap of like, oh, yes, let's do this, that you can. And that's from the dopamine cycle going round and round. And dopamine is also a focus enhancer. We're going to talk about that more later, which is very, very important superpower in this modern age, is just the ability to focus. And then it's also a precursor for flow. Flow is a very high dopamine state. And we're going to talk about how to use that effectively throughout the cycle. Also, this matters because we want to avoid unhelpful pleasure and reward behaviors, for instance, like alcohol or video games or something, which are generally very high dopamine, high stimulating, as well as maybe even social circumstances, even crime, like committing crimes, whether it's graffiti or robbery or whatever. Like, to some people, that is a very, very high stress, high dopamine kind of activity, but we want to make the right behaviors for us addictive instead of the unhelpful ones. Producing dopamine isn't the only important thing here. We also need to be receptive to it. We're going to talk about the mechanics of that in the cycle in a little bit, but poor dopamine receptivity strongly correlates with obesity, which you could call a food addiction. And usually the fast food and the snack foods that are very high calorie, high salt, high sugar and whatnot, they are literally engineered to be as addictive as possible to your brain. You know, as much dopamine as possible with every bite, and that keeps you wanting more, craving more, coming back for more, and that obviously can lead to obesity. But we can break that cycle. Same with gambling. You know, that's an addiction, a very high dopamine activity. Bam, 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 bam. You need to take bigger risks to get the same amount of like thrill overall. And it can be rewarding. You know, it has this allure, just like social media, of like, oh, sometimes I win, sometimes I don't. All that. Porn addictions, they're extremely high dopamine as well. Drug addictions, same thing, like cocaine, right? Cocaine just absolutely bombards your brain with dopamine to the point where like everything else in your life almost just like isn't as exciting as that massive dump of dopamine from certain drugs. Video game addictions, you know, they are also completely rigged to give you all the squirts of dopamine and try again, right? TV shows, which are very, you know, high stim, especially like action comedies and whatever, where they're funny and they're like thrilling and there's lots of stuff going on. These trigger a lot of dopamine, and that's why it can keep people coming back to the couch time and time again, even though they know they have better, more meaningful things to do. They are chemically addicted more or less to even just a TV. Extreme sports. Now, if you can imagine something like extreme skiing or base jumping or something, people are doing something extremely thrilling, and that is also addictive, a very, very high dopamine activity, especially when they get into flow regularly. In extreme sports, there are a lot of triggers for flow states. You have things like risk, things like challenge, complexity, all dialed in to make it very, very fun, but very addictive. Not all of these are bad. Things like focusing on work. You know, that can be in a healthy way, that can be aligned with your values, or it might not be. And you might call it workaholicism. You're just like, oh, I just can't stop working, even though maybe you've got other things that you value more than the results of the work or the money or whatever that comes in. Overall, if you have poor dopamine receptivity, you probably do not feel a lot of peace throughout your days, throughout your life. But there is something we can do about it. So what is dopamine? It's a hormone and it's a neurotransmitter. It's produced in the substantia nigra, the ventral tegmental area, and the hypothalamus, which are parts in your brain. Once it's produced, then it is up to the receptors to be able to receive it, to take it in, and then a whole bunch of parts of the body respond in certain ways depending on the context. You can see more about that there. It is the main pleasure and reward chemical. That's what makes it famous. And it often is seen with serotonin for that feel good and whatnot, but not always. Of course, dopamine correlates with higher flow, better focus, and more motivation to repeat the dopamine triggering behavior. So dopamine is more or less the reason that we can become addicted to any sort of task. Have you ever seen that show, My Strange Addiction, where there's all sorts of weird stuff? People are addicted to eating plastic bags or something. Well, you can bet that every one of those strange addictions, for some reason, gives that person a hit of dopamine. And like any addiction, over time, you become desensitized to it. We're going to talk about how to resensitize. But with desensitization, you need a bigger and bigger hit, basically, to get the same amount of reward sensation, which is why drug addicts tend to take more and more drugs, or even like chili addicts, eating hot sauce, right? You want something a little bit more spicy and a little bit more spicy for the same sensation or amount of dopamine.
And cycling is my addiction. Pedaling is like a drug. If I miss a few hours, I'd become anxious and I start to develop cold symptoms.
I'm Bianca and I'm addicted to eating pottery. I can't live without it. It's something that my body kind of just craves. It's kind of salty and kind of gritty, and I like the way it dissolves on my tongue. I don't smoke.
This is about as far as I'll go on the glass. Anywhere further than this.
And I love sniffing and chewing dirty diapers.
Alright, I've been alluding to the dopamine cycle for a while. First, we have some sort of trigger, whether that's internal or external. And then we have this release of dopamine, right? We experience increased motivation, increased focus, heightened alertness, and all of that, right? And we get some sort of sense of pleasure and reward there. With that, we get a certain amount of desensitization. Every time we get a squirt of dopamine, there's always a low to the high. Now, even though desensitization is happening, sometimes people don't actually resensitize and they kind of skip to the next trigger. They take another hit of drugs, they pull the slot machine again, whatever it is, right? And they don't resensitize effectively. But basically, resensitization is achieved by not triggering a whole bunch of dopamine, right? It's resting, sleeping, being bored, all these like low stimulation things. And that is very, very important to reset the cycle and be actually sensitive to dopamine in an effective way when you need it for the right activities. Later in this video, we are going to talk about how to trigger dopamine release effectively when you want it, so you can get that focus, that flow, that motivation, that pleasure and reward for your high value activities, as well as how to resensitize effectively, because that makes all the stimulation and the dopamine release mean that much more to you. This is all relevant to stopping doom scrolling on your phone, to stopping watching TV every night, to porn addictions, food and drug addictions, whatever it is. We can interrupt this dopamine cycle, unprune it, put it somewhere more meaningful. On the positive side of things, the smarter we work with dopamine, the more we naturally increase motivation, the easier time we have making healthy habits stick, and we experience overall increased life satisfaction. That's a pretty good deal. So method 1 here is a dopamine fast. The purpose here is to reset your dopamine sensitivity by reducing stimulation for some amount of time. And so level 1, you could do this every day. And it's just making sure that you have a quiet environment, is visually simple, you don't have a bunch of fancy art everywhere, and you have simple food without a ton of flavor. And I say simple movement because exercise, it can actually trigger a whole ton of dopamine. And so if you strip it down to the basics, if you still want to move, things like walking, basic calisthenics and whatnot actually trigger less dopamine than trying new fancy athletic movements and workouts, right? Also, turning off notifications on your phone, just cutting it all out. No emails, no nothing. just bare minimum. Just make that like an everyday thing. You can go to your settings, turn everything off except the things that you absolutely need to know about, which are maybe like upcoming Zoom meetings or whatever you need to do. And then no stimulating videos, no TV on, no blaring music or whatever. These are all things that trigger dopamine, and there's a time and a place for them. But we don't just have them on all the time, or we would be basically making them count less when we actually want it. So that can be done any day, pretty casually, right? Now, level 2 is a more legitimate dopamine fast. And so you can pick a 24-hour window, and basically it's extremely low stimulation the whole time, extremely low dopamine. So no books, no screens, no talking, no exercise, no food. What are you gonna do then, right? Now you can move, right? You can walk, you can sit, but you're making your life as simple and as boring as possible. You're probably not gonna work much. You might journal. You can modify how strict you are with this if you want, but like water and journaling, sitting, meditating, breathing, like that's basically it. You can go look at flowers, you can go look at the sky. It's only 24 hours, and it makes a world of difference. If you do this regularly, as well as integrate some of the level 1 stuff just on a weekly basis, like, all right, no videos today, no notifications coming on your phone, no social medias, whatever that. All of that really stacks in, so when you get dopamine, it means a lot more to you, and you're able to trigger flow and focus when you want it. Level 3 is a lot more serious, and that's more like a 3-day vision quest, Native American style, or a 10-day Vipassana, where you sit, you walk, and you eat 1 or 2 simple plain foods per day. You're in a different environment, like you're not doing anything stimulating. At the end of an experience like that, it's funny how the most basic things seem so rewarding and pleasurable. And things that you used to be addicted to, like TV or whatnot, just seem like so much. They seem really intense. You can see them for what they are, which is a very triggering thing. And you might be more prone to like, actually I felt a lot better with my life when I wasn't engaging in that activity. So you build awareness and you change your behavior from there. So method 1 I suggest everybody starting with, because that is resensitizing and making all of these next ones more effective. So now let's get into triggering dopamine in a more effective way. So with method 2, we are setting clear goals. The purpose of this is to provide direction and a sense of purpose, which enhances dopamine release in the most internal, intrinsic motivation kind of way. So we can implement this by breaking large missions, large tasks, into smaller, more manageable goals. And that way you can kind of like check it off, be like, and get that dopamine on a daily basis at least. So clear goals, you have multiple clear goals in a single day. For example, if your big goal was to publish a book by January 2026 or something, you could break that down all the way down to today and be like, I want to write 500 words on this chapter, and I want to write 500 words on this other chapter, and that would be considered a success. And so even if you only wrote 500 words on one chapter today out of, 100,000 words for the total book, you would consider that a win. That would give you a squirt of dopamine. And it wouldn't just be like this overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I'm so far behind my goal. You break it down so every day is a success, and that keeps you motivated to wake up and do it again tomorrow and do the work that counts. Same with fitness. You might have the goal of losing like 50 pounds of fat, for instance. And yet today you can check off the box and say, I did my workout and I went for a walk before breakfast and all of that, right? And that makes that day a victory. That gives you that dopamine, that motivation, that reward, and that makes the behavior more likely to continue tomorrow. So celebrate small wins, trigger that dopamine, reinforce desirable, helpful, value-based behavior. Use the habit tracker for that. So 3 here is actually adding flow triggers to your most meaningful activities when it counts. And so this is selectively using things like music to make the most out of certain windows of time when you actually want and need to focus the most. Things like sports with friends, that are dangerous, and then you add like blaring EDM music on top of that, it becomes so dopamine triggering that it can really put you into the zone and you can have a really good focus time there. But if you did it all the time, then it's not going to work, which is why we want to use these selectively and not rely on them to get into that zone of focus. But they are enhancers, they're boosters, they're not to be used all the time. So flow triggers include things like novelty, complexity, unpredictability, risk, group coherence, or like a group common goal and whatnot. They can all enhance engagement and motivation in a very powerful way and zap you into that flow state. Now leave a list of flow triggers in the resources here. And so implementing this requires the right challenge skills balance, which means that you're working in a way where like you're pushing your limits, but just a little bit. You're not pushing way outside of your limits where you just can't do it and you can't succeed and you don't have the dopamine because you're not succeeding in that skill. But pushing your limits a little bit and achieving things there is wonderful. It is very, very motivating, and you get a lot of dopamine when you do that, when you achieve goals just outside of your comfort zone. But you can also mix things up, keep it fresh and exciting. This is the novelty factor. If you've been doing the same old boring workout and you're losing drive about it, then maybe change up the workout. Make it a little bit faster, make it a little bit slower, change up the order of it, introduce novelty, complexity, something, and you might find yourself actually getting a lot more focus for free. Method number 4, I don't know if I should even call it a method, but it's just maintaining a healthy diet day to day. And so this is just important in general, but specifically foods rich in tyrosine, which is an amino acid that contributes to dopamine production, are particularly helpful if you want to make sure that you're stocked up. So obviously eating a diverse range of foods, especially bananas, avocados, nuts, and whatnot, they have higher amounts of tyrosine. But just making sure that you have all of the essential amino acids at the very least, and maybe glycine as well. If you were vegetarian and you wanted to supplement, you might want to take about 10 grams of essential amino acids every day, just to make sure you can build anything you want. Creatine would really help as well, and glycine, which is the most simple amino acid, which means that it's kind of the building block for a lot of more complex amino acids, including something like tyrosine. So essential amino acids, creatine, and glycine, they can really help you produce neurotransmitters more easily, especially if you have a very simple diet or it's maybe lacking in some diverse food groups for whatever reason. Main thing is just to eat a wide variety of good healthy food, vegetables, all of that. Number 5 is quality sleep, and this is super important on a regular basis because sleep is essential for dopamine receptor sensitivity. It's in a way, it's a very, very boring time, right? You're not getting a lot of stimulation when you're asleep unless you are listening to music or something like that. But very important for overall health, the ability to wake up, feel energized, feel driven, to focus on the task at hand, to even get the dopamine triggers in the first place, gotta be well rested. So how to implement this? 1, aim for quality sleep every night. Establish a regular routine, a schedule, and stick to it. Create a restful environment, and you can learn you can learn a ton about that in the sleep video we have in here. So go watch that if you haven't already. Number 6, healthy social connections. And this is cool because even if you are not physically present with someone or physically talking to them, positive relationships with others can enhance your baseline dopamine levels and overall well-being. Just that sense of like, you feel secure in your tribe, you feel like you have that sense of belonging. That is actually like an event to your dopamine levels, and it just feels good to have good relationships. You can implement this by cultivating quality relationships with friends and family. I know, easier said than done sometimes. You can engage in community or group projects or hobbies or something to foster connections, and this is a great opportunity to get together with friends for your favorite sport or something. Go skiing with friends. But you want to make sure that these people, these activities are in good alignment with your values, right? Because this works both ways, and it gets confusing when there's like one thing you like, let's say, you like skiing with friends, but then they also like drinking at the same time, for instance. And one, you want to go skiing and have a good time, but like you don't want to get into the drinking culture. So that gets a little bit tricky because like in a way you're addicted to the socializing, but you really don't want to get pulled into something that isn't aligned with your values. That is why nowadays I opt for loneliness over the sense of I'm not really acting in alignment with my values with these people. And it's okay, you'll only be lonely for a certain amount of time, and it gives you space to encounter healthier social circles, doing the activities that you love, and all of that. And don't expect this to be easy if you need to pull away from a social group that isn't in alignment with your values, because I mean internally, like, just hanging out with that social group is addictive in the sense of like you get dopamine from that experience, but it might be coming at a really steep cost. Quick little tangent here is my favorite definition of a friend at the moment is somebody that you could share absolutely anything with, just like you were thinking it privately, and they would accept you and love you anyways, whatever. You're not hesitant to like hide things from them. If you can't tell these people absolutely everything and you have them respond hopefully in a positive way, in a helpful way, in a non-judgmental way, then they might not yet make the cut. So here's a few tips for seamlessly integrating these things into your life. 1, acknowledge the principle of relativity. It means the more boring your regular life, the more exciting simple things become. Which is great because you get a little dopamine hit, it's rewarding, and it enhances focus. Even if you're just like at work writing a book or something, right? It actually becomes very exciting when not working is even more boring. On the flip side, if you're scrolling, you watch porn or something, and you're having high stimulation snack foods, and then you try to go and write that book is going to seem really boring according to the principle of relativity. Every high has its low. And you can use that to your advantage to make the right activities seemingly very exciting. Use stacking with caution, right? We talked about stacking stimulators. This can be helpful for triggering flow with a dopamine hit, but use only when it's important and useful. Use music with your workout or while you're playing sports, maybe only once a week, not every day. You're going to get fried out and become less receptive if you did it every day. Enjoy boredom and low stim time daily. And this can be an intentional practice like meditation in the morning or before bed. It really helps you wind down, get ready for sleep, as well as wind up and, keep your day interesting when you've been awake for a while, kind of like doing nothing in a meditation practice. That can really help. But also just like naturally throughout your day, be okay with low stimulation time. If you're standing in a line, you can just stand there. You don't need to do anything. You can just stand there. You can be bored right now watching this video. So if these videos are ever boring, you're going to appreciate them as good quality, low stimulation time to make your dopamine more sensitive, right? Just know that rest and reset is essential for your next flow cycle. So appreciate the boredom times. It's going to make your highs higher. Lastly, schedule your dopamine fasts and please share your experience afterwards. I'd really love to hear your insights. What was it like on the day? Did the day feel like it went on forever? Did it go by really fast? What was your next days like following, that like level 2 dopamine fast, or following something like a Vipassana retreat if you really go for it, 10 days, doing nothing but sitting, walking, and observing very, 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 very simple things. My experiences with dopamine fasting are always very, very valuable. They seem like the most ordinary things in the world, and yet life can become very extraordinary when we integrate these things. And having the science to back up why these things work, why spiritual traditions have been doing things like basically dopamine fasts for thousands of years, and people then relay them as like super mystical, powerful experiences. Well, there's a reason for that chemically as well as beyond. To take this to the extreme, there's actually a story of a secret cave somewhere in Egypt, apparently, that people would go to, and they'd go into the cave. They had no light, so they couldn't see anything. It was a cave, so there's almost no sound. They had no food, and in some cases, they probably didn't even have water. And they didn't talk, just nothing, like pretty much sensory deprivation for 3 whole days. And then they would enter an inner chamber that had a fire in it. And so upon entering and seeing this fire, they'd often be like overwhelmed. It'd be a very, very intense experience. They'd come away with visions, whatever it is, with clarity like nothing else. And their lives were changed permanently. And that, in a way, is like an extreme version of a dopamine fast. The Native American Vision Quest, very similar. So if you're feeling a little stuck, you're overstimulated, like you're burning out, like you're not motivated, whatever it is, do this dopamine fast. Let me know how it goes.